Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I am excited to do this episode. I think lead capture, obviously huge topic at events, right? Piles into ROI, piles into the success of events. And Ryan, I've gotten to know Ryan over the last 2 years, really. Here, we met at Exhibitor maybe 2 years ago. And I think Ryan has a cool company, understands leads, passionate about leads, lead capture, kind of methodology behind it. We've had some really good conversations. He was on my podcast at Exhibitor Live a while back, which I thought that was a great conversation. So today we're going to talk leads, talk lead capture, should try to give you all as many good nuggets as we possibly can and open the floor for questions when we get there. So Ryan, welcome, my friend. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you.
First of all, thanks for having me again for a second time, man. So the first time I must not have been that bad. So you said, hey,
Did good.
I'm
Yeah.
back. But I really appreciate you having me here at this event and look forward to chatting in the conversation.
Awesome, man. Let's do it. So my thought on why this is an important topic, just to kind of lay this out for everybody, is that, I've been reading industry reports for 12 years now, right? And majority exhibitors in every single report that has ever come out, when they are asked, why do you exhibit? Leads is one of the top three answers every single time, all the time, right?
Mm.
In my opinion, leads are only as good as the follow-up. So you're talking personalization, information, timeliness, context that you're given. And obviously that requires organization to be able to follow up properly. So give me your take from leads at events and why lead capture is so important.
Sure. First of all, I second the comment about people typically exhibit at trade shows because they're there for leads. However, I'm going to play the devil's advocate for a second. I've had companies actually tell me, and it's not very common. I'd say maybe 10% of the time, I hear companies talking about, oh, well, it's not really about leads. These are defense contractors or other entities that are not there just for leads. Sometimes they say, hey, we're there for brand awareness or recognition. It's sort of like a necessary evil. You've got to be there. If you're not there, people wonder, why are you not there? So that's very important. And I think actually lead capture kind of blends into that. If you're there for awareness, well, then you're there to build relationships. And I really hate kind of referring to it sometimes as lead capture because that's maybe a misnomer. It's not just about leads in that context. It might be more about the relationship, the discussion, the data that you're collecting so that you can follow up better and nurture and build those relationships. But Matt, I'm going to go back to leads. And why is that important? This is a fact. 40% of a company's pipeline is driven by events. So if events are so important, and they're so important to the point that 40% of your pipeline depends on that, let's make sure we do it right. That's really important.
So you said a lot there, which is great. No, it's amazing. So there's just some things that I know I did. No, it's really good stuff. So some of the things you said there. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about like people saying, hey, we don't go for leads, we go for brand awareness. I've heard that a ton, right? It's a question that we ask to a lot of exhibitors. Some of that, like I just call complete bullshit on. Some of it, I think is totally factual. And some companies to a degree don't know any better. They're like, yeah, we go because we always go. Right? We go because we have to support the contract. We got to support the doctors, right? Like that whole thing. But to me, that's making a very large budget item spend, which is trade shows and events, and turning it into a cost of doing business versus a sales and marketing strategy, right? So I think with that, to marry on top of what you said that I love, is you're talking, it's not really lead capture. I love what you're saying, but it's like data. So you're going to these events, and I don't care who you are, whether you're there for so people know that you exist or so that you're supporting the industry. I still think at the end of the day, you're either finding net new leads, you are accelerating deals or partnerships that are already in your pipeline or people you're already working with, right? You're revitalizing old accounts. Maybe you go to this event and you're dealing with all these different, whatever it is your audience is, and now your deal size starts to grow from deals that were already in your pipeline with some of these people. There's so many actions that are happening. And I think to your point, that's why getting that data and capturing it it's not just net new leads, is so important because it is 40% of some people's pipeline, without a doubt.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it's important to make sure that the conversations are recorded. You do a great job collecting the data. We have a client of ours that basically said like, hey, it's really important for me to make sure I know the touch points, right? So when you capture your leads or capture that data, you want to make sure you get that into your CRM or your marketing automation system, and it becomes an entry in the timeline. So when you're doing follow-up, whether that's you or somebody else, you can see that entry in the timeline, and that, hey, we met you there and we had discussions there.
From your conversations with your clients, from your conversations with prospects and people that are interested in utilizing your software and having the lead data capture discussion, where do you feel exhibitors, event managers, where do they struggle the most with leads and the organization of this data from their events?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. It really is. But I'm happy to
get to get.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it on. I really kind of boil that down in my mind around process, like one word, process. It's a revelation to us. Obviously, we drink our own champagne. I don't like to say we eat our own dog food because dog food is kind of gross, but we use our software, when we exhibit, and we have very successful exhibits. So I think it's all about process. And again, that's, if you unpack process, that's very loaded. But to me, in its very simplest form, a good process means you have a routine, you have a protocol, you have these steps, whatever you want to call it, but you're rinsing and repeating. It's something that you can take from one event to another. And I just want to talk briefly about the problems that a lot of event coordinators, event marketers face when they do trade shows. They're always going from one exhibit to another. We have clients that do 50 shows, 100 shows plus, right? Or even if you're doing half a dozen. But every show you're going to, I'd say 80% of the time, most of our clients say, hey, we just use whatever lead capture the show provides. And that is really tough because you don't have control over the process. You don't know what the process is until maybe 2 weeks or a month before you get there. It's a different app or a scanner, whatever you want to call it, every single time. So it's not a repeatable process. How are you going to follow up? Where is the information going to go? So there's issues with all of that. And then there's a lot of manual work involved in that process and using these disparate apps that it's very time consuming, and people don't really realize the cost of having to invest that time. So really, Matt, to me, it's about process and making sure, again, you have that systematic way from one event to another, that blueprint for how you're going to capture and follow up and all of that.
Interesting makes me think like, if you're going show to show and you're using the different lead retrieval, they call them, I think retrieval is even worse than capture, right? When you're putting it in there. Yeah. But when you're using those, talking about like, it really just becomes an export system to a large degree. Now they're better than they were, right? But it's like, you're just, you're capturing it, you're using it, and then you're trying to export. Then you have to get it into your own, whatever it is you're using, CRM, HubSpot, right? It doesn't matter. So the inconsistencies there must be large and it must be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, what if I asked you, Matt, every time you came into work, you're going to use a new operating system, oh, today you're going to use Windows. Tomorrow you're going to use a Mac. Yeah. A lot of people don't like one or the other, or, hey, you're going to use Linux, you're going to use Ubuntu, or what if your email client changed every day? I mean, people are going to they would go nuts. So, you need something. I think part of what we might touch on is adoption. Like, how can you get adoption and train people and build excitement when everything changes on you from one event to another?
I think that's a great point. I mean, I could barely use the coffee machine at my office every single day, let alone like going to a show and then having to provide these leads and drive results. And right. I mean, makes complete sense. What it leads me to think about asking you is I've always had this thought process of like, as I stated a little bit earlier, when people go to events, like events don't just produce net new leads. They don't. They produce a lot of things. that people are at these events for: new prospects, current customers, partnerships. And then inside of those three things, I think you have all different types of positive outcomes and positive forces that trade shows and events are the catalyst for, right? So my question to you is there a way, or are there companies doing it? And I don't know if it's possible in your software. I've always had this idea of like tagging, right? So any touch point, if I have 10 trade shows a year, any touch point I have with anybody, if they come to an engagement, come to my booth, do a demo, come to a dinner, I want to put this event tag on them in a software that I have, because I want to watch the trends of what's happening with these people that have that tag. Am I crazy with that? Or is there something there that maybe you guys have or that people are doing in that space?
No, you're spot on. And I'm never one to, try to make this a software pitch or anything like that. Yeah.
Well, I asked. It's okay.
Or the attribution. The attribution is very important. I mean, and I'll tell you what we do for attribution. We have a concept. It's called a station. So our software is called Universal Lead Capture. The universal is the operative word here. It's take it with you wherever you go, whether it's a trade show or, where you're badge scanning. And what we're seeing is a lot of clients are doing smaller events, right? Tabletop events, or they're out there networking and all of that. So you need this app, this solution to take with you, no matter what type of event it is. But to your point, yes, we use stations. So you can basically set the app to say, hey, I'm at my booth, or hey, I'm doing networking right now, or hey, I'm in my, my keynote presentation, whatever it might be. But we actually keep track of the very first touch point, and then we keep track of all the touch points, and we can do analysis and data on it. But yeah, I think that attribution is very important. And we have large clients, that have mega booths, and they might have different experiential areas within their booth. And so it's very important to kind of tag that, because that allows you to take that information and then again, keep it in your back end system, your CRM automation, to communicate with these people. And then you mentioned partners and customers, right? All of that. You might need, want to have those radio buttons or tags on your form to indicate the type of person, so you know where to route your follow-up. That's important too.
Yeah. I ask about the customer piece because I think a lot of people, there is this whole discussion in the industry about ROI. Like everybody wants to talk ROI. I think ROI for events is way more complex, and people are just ramming down others' throats that they need to get ROI for their events, right? But my point of asking the whole tagging question is like, I mean, I've been to a ton of events for us, events for our customers. We build, we design for events, we do strategy for it, right? Like, and my whole thing is I've seen it to where somebody runs into an old customer at an event. They used to be a customer, no longer a customer, or maybe they used to spend $100,000 a year. Now they're spending 10, but they bump in, they end up at a dinner together, or they say, hey, why don't you pop by the booth tomorrow? They come over to the booth, they have a conversation. That dead account now over the next 24 months turns into a $200,000 account. There has to be a way to quantify that, because that matters. That's happening at events. It's not net new. It's not a source. It's not a trade show source lead. It's not. It's an old customer. So that's the questions that I'm having, which is like, that's where I think people that have to build event managers, marketers, head of global events, directors of events, they're going to have to build a business case for what is actually happening at these shows. And I think that's a major component. And there's a lot of nuggets inside of that, other than, just that one example I gave.
Yeah, I think building a business case for events is really important. The way that we do that, we do some very creative things. So to your point, if you first meet somebody, we need to kind of measure that attribution that we met them at the event, but we tie in with Salesforce.com. So if that same person, then becomes an opportunity, and then that goes to opportunity close one, we can tie that revenue back. Plus, we're doing some neat things, because when you meet people, there might be, certain things that you might be interested in, solution A, B, or C. And depending on what they care about, you already know the pipeline impact, if you will, or influence pipeline from
impact,
what you care about. And then what your conversion rate is, typically you can kind of figure out when you meet people at events, like you're saying, it's a lot different from, I got a pay-per-click ad or they found me on Google. Because it's that human connection. So your conversions should be a little higher and you could apply those conversions. So event marketers should be able to measure pipeline impact and kind of forecast revenue. And then the ultimate connection to ROI. ROI seems, oh yeah, I got a lot of leads, this and that. I think a lot of people don't measure it because, like you said, it can be complex, but it really doesn't have to be that complex.
Yeah, it can be daunting. I think there's a great comment in the chat from Suki. She said, I like using ROO metrics versus ROI, return on objectives for ROO. This way the visibility, touch points with current customers, meetings held, et cetera, are easier to quantify. And Suki, I couldn't agree more. I think ROO is where you start and it's measuring against what your objectives are and what matters. Eventually you have to get to ROI. You have to find a way to get there, but ROO is the place you start. What are the objectives? What are the positives that are happening? How many meetings? Who are these people? Which partnerships are developed? Did you see a customer at this show that's in the middle of a deal with you and it was a $40,000 deal? And then within the next 60, 90 days, somehow that deal just becomes a $70,000 deal, right? That deal size went up. That touch point in that event has to matter to it. So it's like starting with the ROO and then moving into ROI. And to your point, Ryan, as well, it is a daunting task, but it doesn't have to be. I think it's two pieces. It's being specific in what matters to you to create ROI. And then the other piece is the tracking and the information that's available to you.
Yeah, I like the ROO metric as well. I've also heard ROE, return on experience. And these are things like, I really think every exhibitor should kind of have a pipeline, sort of like a sales team has a pipeline, but we should be able to see traffic, dwell time, those kinds of things. And then going from there to how many leads did we collect? How many meetings did we have from that or booked from that? And then what, the conversion ultimately to revenue there.
Ryan, I want to talk a little bit about in the lead and data capture world here. I want to talk about engagement, right? So, what are the problems with capturing information on the show floor and at events in a manner that feels maybe not, you don't want it to be transactional, right? You want it to have a natural feel to it. People want it to flow a bit. So what are some kind of problems in that space? What are some solutions? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think oftentimes, and maybe there might be a certain message like, hey, we got to get a lot of leads. But I think for the most part, teams are they don't have the proper training. I think it's important to train teams, before you exhibit, kind of walk them through the do's and don'ts. But I think one of the mistakes we make here is we just, our first thought is, let me scan your badge, and I think it's really important to make a connection and have a conversation with somebody. One job in my career was working at Fry's Electronics in retail. And I remember they told me, and I'll always kind of hold on to this, is like, hey, make sure you say hello to everybody, every person you see, every customer, just say hi, And I think that's really important for teams to do, is just be nice and professional and greet people. And everybody is typically there for a reason. So, opening tags should be, hey there, what brought you to this event, whatever it is, and then open the discussion. And again, don't be so quick to scan the badge. I think understand why somebody is there, understand the challenge or the problem they're facing or what brought them there, and then, go from there. I think the second point is it always helps to have an icebreaker. We have what we call digital activation. So instead of customers bringing in a physical whack-a-mole or spin the wheel or Plinko table or what have you, you can have a digital version of that, run it on a tablet or a touchscreen display. And then those are just good icebreakers, to pull people in and warm them up and have a conversation. So I think, again, don't be so quick to scan the badge and have an easy way to kind of pull people in. We've closed big business just by having that icebreaker or saying hello, simple things.
About the importance of alignment with staff at a booth. I think that gets lost a lot of times. People always use the terms booth training or staff training. And a lot of the staff and booth training programs that I've seen are just like very basic and very old school. And my thoughts on this are, if you have a staff of 15, 5, 10, doesn't matter, 30 inside of a trade show booth, I think it's so important that everybody understands why you are there and what you are trying to accomplish. Like, what's the program? What are we doing here for 3 days? Some of the things like, don't eat out in the open and things, and don't let your book bag. That's like common sense stuff. You know what I mean? We're talking like, do you understand what we're doing? It's like when I go to Disney with my wife and my kids. I know what I'm doing at Disney for 3 days. I'm a machine, right? I'm just doing what my wife needs. It's all about the kids. It's about their experience. I'm not there like, oh, what are we doing this morning? And like, like I understand what's all happening. I find that when I go to some trade show booths, you have staff, they don't even know what's going on. They don't know what's happening, why they're there. They're unsure who the audience is. They don't know how to like qualify and discover people. I imagine that has to play a huge role in what you're talking about with lead capture and like the authenticity of it.
Yeah. And by the way, I think Disney might be just as expensive as exhibiting the so I hear you, but yeah, I think on the lines of alignment of your team, it is very important to talk about why you're there, and that goes back to the very beginning of our discussion. Typically, you're there to get leads, and you're there to have quality leads. So I think making sure that people understand that, one thing that we do, it's built into our software, is we help companies establish goals. So we had a client come to us, hey, we're here. I said, why are you here at this show? We're here to get 150 leads. Okay, great. That's your goal. Well, now we can have a team goal, or we can have individual goals. Like one thing we did recently at Exhibitor Live is we said, hey, for the one person that captures the most leads on our team, we're going to buy you a round trip flight ticket anywhere in the continental US. And it was fun because now we created a competition. People got excited and they were all kind of in sync on that. We also have a competition to see who can book the most meetings, which, by the way, is a separate topic. It's great that you can collect leads, scan badges, all of that, but it pays huge dividends if you can book a meeting, during that whole process of capturing the lead and having that conversation, especially when it's an urgent lead. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things you can do for alignment, explain to people, why are we here? But most importantly, explain why this helps them as well. That's really important because a lot of objections we have sometimes with adoption is like, people just don't want to use the lead capture app, or maybe there's too many questions. I mean, certainly there are best practices, but help people understand why we're collecting this data. What does it mean? And how does it help them, individually? Is it better follow-up? Is it more personalization that you can have now in your follow-up? All of those things.
It's funny. I was talking to a woman. She is the global head of events of a company, and they run a big host event of theirs. And I was asking her about their host event. I mean, they host like 3,000 people, right? And I was asking about like what outcomes they're seeking, what's going on. Like, again, one of my questions, what's actually happening at your event? And it was interesting. What she mentioned to me was like, well, we drive in a lot of our customers come to this host event. And we have seen statistically year over year that those customers, their average deals increase post-event. So interestingly enough, for alignment, she takes that information and uses it to leverage sales to set meetings. Because sales like, I don't know, you want me to reach out to them, and they're like, hey, I don't know about you, but I'd be interested in having my deal size double over the next 9 months on X clients, but you got to get them here. So that's where the alignment comes in to some degree.
Agree. Yeah. By our data and our research, having the proper lead capture strategy can increase your deal size by 20%, shorten your sales cycles by 40%.
20 and 40 on that? I love that.
Shortening sales cycles and of course, collecting more leads. And we have 74% more leads as a data point on that. But shortening the sales cycle is really important because, again, it's about quality. We do a really neat thing in our software, and we encourage our clients to do this, but we call them audio notes, and people get so excited about it. But, you know, instead of just, hey, let me check some boxes and, you know, tick a radio button and all of that, or put in, you know, one sentence about somebody, we have the audio notes where when somebody leaves, you take 30 seconds, you walk away, you know, you tap a button, you record,
Love that.
you kind of debrief with yourself, you know, hey,
Yep.
I learned about Matt. He loves golf. He came here from Florida. Here's why he's
Yep.
here, this and that. And then, you know, we turn that into a link that can flow on into your CRM or marketing automation. So when that gets passed on, whoever's working on that, whether that's person, I mean, that individual, you know, exhibiting, or somebody else, because oftentimes that may not be the sales rep, you know, who's on the show floor who captures the lead. Like you said, it could be a current customer, somebody else's customer. But what now, you know, when you pass that off, you want to make sure it's really quality information so you can have substance. And when you do that follow-up, and then again, you're shortening the sales cycle.
Love that note, because imagine you run into a customer and maybe their rep or person is not there, but you just get them into conversation, right? And they're, you know, you end up having a conversation and they're frustrated with something, and you could sense they're frustrated with something, right? So easily fixable. And sometimes people don't reach out to vent those frustrations. And as a company, you want to know your frustration so you can go fix it. Quick little voice note over into the CRM, rep gets it, can call up Jennifer, say, Jennifer, you're at the event. You guys were you were talking about this with Dave, man, we really want to address this with you. That's traction, man. That's like,
yes.
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
And on top of that, you can hear the inflection, you know, when you're doing audio, the recording. So that's very different, you know, oh, they were upset versus, oh my gosh, they were really, really pissed, you know. You can hear that within the audio note. So, I mean, there's a game that I thought of. I remember playing it as a kid. I forget the name of it, but the telephone game, it's like, or whatever they call it. But hey, I'm going to tell you something, and you're in a group and you pass it on and it goes to a second person. By the time it goes all the way around, it's totally different. So you got to make sure the information you're passing on is pristine, is captured correctly, and the sentiment of all of it is preserved, right?
It's a great point. Give me those percentages again. You're saying by using a lead data capture system, you shorten your sales cycle by 20% and deal size increases by 40. Do I have those wrong?
Yeah, flip them. So shorten sales cycles by 40% and increase deal sizes by 20%. And of course, if you have the right strategy for capturing leads, which is kind of a whole new topic, but in my opinion, you want to have every staff member who is in your company at the show collecting leads. You want to have a kiosk set up, you know, God forbid somebody walks by, oh, there's nobody I could talk to, they're all tied up. Well, have a kiosk or have a QR code that people could scan and fill out a form on their phone, and then all the leads get funneled into the same place. When you're speaking or you're doing a keynote, you know, have a poll or do something where people can scan a QR code, and then you're collecting a lead that way. Like if you do the proper universal lead capture strategy at a show, you can maximize how many leads you're collecting and maximize the touch points, right? The data that we talked about collecting also.
Yeah. So kind of two pieces that you're touching on here that I want to segue to. One is strategy and the other is personalization. We're kind of hitting on both, which is excellent, right? Because I think personalization is so important when you're gaining and garnering this information on the floor. You know, Maria wrote in the chat, she wrote, events are shortening the booth hours and then restricting where we are allowed to use the lead retrieval scanner. Makes it harder for us to capture leads when we are networking during breakfast, lunch, or parties. Maria, that's true. I think as an exhibitor, as a sponsor, you have every right to ask your show, why are these hours being shortened? Why am I unable to do this? Asking them for more options, asking them for different style sponsorships. I also think that goes back into what Ryan and I are talking about, which is like, hey, if you're going to be left with less time, you need to get more out of that time. So personalization is important, and the strategy in which you are using, because the days of just standing around and scanning badges like a bunch of crazy people should be gone. And I think it is on its way out. So Ryan, let's talk a little bit about personalization in terms of lead capture, the importance of it, what people should be doing, examples?
Well, obviously we talked about the audio note
Voice
piece.
note, yeah.
I think with personalization, again, it's about being able to make sure you have the right information in your follow-up so that it is personal. There's kind of a data point that I'm going to throw out, and I just did the math, but trade show floors, and again, we're talking about the show hours being shortened, which is true. I see a lot of events kind of focus on education and to complement the trade shows, but on average, the trade show floors are open for 12 hours. So if a staff member had one conversation every 5 minutes, okay, that's 144 conversations. So a staff member having on average 144 discussions. And then the attendees, this is a fact, attendees spent 8.3 hours viewing at the exhibition. So if they spend 8.3 hours, and let's say they have a conversation every 5 minutes, that's about 100 conversations at the exhibit hall. Well, why am I sharing this with you? Attendees have 100 conversations. Staff members in the booth have 144 conversations on average. Can people remember what they talk about, and who they meet? It's very important to differentiate yourself, number one. But number two, make sure you have the ability to collect the right information and personalize the follow-up. One of my favorite tips is right when you get there to your trade show, get your team together. You're all wearing your outfits, uniforms, and your booth looks really nice before traffic is flowing around. But get the team together, take a picture of the team, and then you already have your follow-up email queued up, right? So put that picture of your team in your follow-up email so that people remember, because again, they have, hundreds of conversations, and plus I'm sure they go out to social events and have fun, but you got to make sure that you make that connection. And when people see that email, the picture, oh yeah, I met Matt at Rockway, cool, I can make that connection. And then you got the audio note and the personalized follow-up. I think another thing that's really important, Matt, on the personalization note is make sure when you do your follow-up communication, you're sending the right material that people care about.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I see people like you get a follow-up email because I've had my badge scanned, but it's just very generic and it's things that I don't even care about. So it's important if I have an interest in product B, that I'm getting a brochure or document or whatever it is on product B. So tailoring what people care about when you're doing your follow-up so that that feels very personalized as well, right? I don't know if I'm addressing the personalization piece.
No, you are 100%. I think it's a great point on the volume of conversations in a shortened period of time that people are having. Yeah. And I love the personalization. Look, I think if you're just use an example, if you're going to a show and you're drawing 100 leads, right? Well, I mean, you don't have 100 great leads. You just don't. You have a breakdown of leads. Some are good, some are okay, some are bad, right? But you have to be able, there's like a stickiness to the follow-up. And when you do follow up, how pointed, specific, and can you draw an emotion from that person or get them to remember you specifically? And that's personalization to me. That if it's the picture of the booth with your team, if it's maybe you were in conversation and they mentioned something about, I don't know, that they were struggling with this and you recommended a book and you're like, hey, I recommended this book for you. I bought you the audio. Like just these little things when you're having conversations, the stickier you can get and the more you can document it, I just think the better off, people are going to be when they go to follow up.
And I think the book example is great, because now if I'm doing my follow up, I can bring that up. Hey, I sent you that book, or did you read that book, or whatever it might be. But most people will not put that into just typing up the notes because it feels kind of difficult. But everybody can tap a button and then speak into it. And that makes life really easy.
I remember years ago, I was at the PGA show and a friend of mine was working at a booth. It was a company that builds simulators, right? And they build them inside people's houses, at stores, at, businesses, restaurants, things like that. I mean, they had probably 10, 12 simulators everywhere. They had salespeople in every, or area, every simulator. They were packed. And I end up my friend was working there for the company. She introduced me to the guy that was running the trade show booth. And I just got, to talking to him. And the biggest problem they had was just too many people, too much volume, and too many conversations. And he's like, we just can't get the information down fast enough, And I had just suggested to him, I'm like, hey, like, why don't you just bring an intern, have an intern run around with an Excel sheet, a software, anything you have, and just go from salesperson to salesperson. Who'd you just talk to? What were the notes? Give me the points, whatever it may be. But you got to be able to get the information down, because things that are said, imagine if you're selling something like a simulator that's $40,000 to somebody. There are nuances to the conversations that you're having that matter in the sale on the follow-up that you have to remember. You can't have them revisit it with you. You have to bring it to the forefront for them. So it just matters.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this ties into the personalization piece and then all the volume of conversations. But one thing that one ROO that we really focused on was booking meetings at our events, and our clients were encouraging them to do the same thing. Our salespeople are typically one of the most expensive assets in a company, right? They're not cheap. And we want to make sure we use their time wisely. So if you make a good connection and it's a personal connection, that's wonderful. Book the meeting right there. And you've got to have good software where you could book the meeting on the spot, because what happens is, again, somebody might say, hey, they give you lip service. This sounds good. 1 week, 2 week, follow up. And then the salesperson, the expensive salesperson, is having to go and chase that individual. And it's this never ending cycle. And eventually, hey, forget about it. They go to the sales development reps or what have you. So booking the meeting makes a big difference. And then it helps you qualify too. If people don't want to book a meeting right there, it's not that qualified. If they're serious, they're going to book the meeting. Why not? And I think rating is also really important, right? Because in your follow-up, I think one of the biggest mistakes that companies can make is that all leads look alike, the volume of leads, and to a point where they're like, I don't even know what to do with it. I'm just going to dump it in my CRM. But if you have sort of a ranking and for where to focus your energy on those urgent leads or the hot leads, that ranking could be subjective, which is what I would recommend. But have a way to really be organized after, the trade show and collecting your leads, so you could focus on what's important.
I've always thought that leads at events should basically have one of two tags, if not both. One should be a sales tag, one should be a marketing tag. Some leads that you get at events don't even need to go to sales. They don't. They should just go straight to marketing with notes on what kind of campaign, what kind of targeting, what kind of nurturing that they require. And then the other one is that, of course, it has to go to sales. And then I think they need to have a grade, A, B, C, D, or some kind of leveling or system that you understand the importance or the urgency of that lead. We have a question, and I always like to get the questions. We have a question from Pauline. She says, on the strategy point, do you have insight or data on exhibitors that choose to do additional sponsorships versus not? What's the most effective and best practices? So she's asking about data for exhibitors that do additional sponsorships versus not doing sponsorships.
I'm sure follow up on that. I don't have any specific data per se, but, I like the Coca-Cola example. Most consumers see the Coca-Cola brand 7 times on average per day. So no doubt, if you're a sponsor at any level and people see your brand, it's just sort of a psychological thing that kind of registers with them. And then they see you exhibit. Oh yeah, I've heard of you. So can it give you a lift? Absolutely. I think anytime people are familiar with you ahead of time or see you somewhere, it just gives you kind of instant credibility. Sponsorships, of course, can be very expensive. So you have to be judicious about what sponsorships you choose. But yeah, it's a good route.
Pauline, I think that's an awesome question. I personally don't have any data on the difference, right? What I would say is in sponsorships, just one of my main thoughts on sponsorships at this point in time is that as an exhibitor, you have to push your association or the show for better sponsorships, different options, negotiate with them, and ask to do things that are outside the box. One of the main things I'm hearing from event marketers is that sponsorships are stale. They don't see the value in them. And at the end of the day, you are trying to get in front of your customer in a meaningful way that will build your brand, drive leads, and, return on your objectives per se. So I would start thinking outside the box. I would also say there are some events that you probably don't have to sponsor, some that you should sponsor. So I think it would be difficult data to get, but definitely interesting data on the idea. I think where it would be skewed is if you just took a bunch of events. I think there's some companies that are just fit to sponsor. They're just fit to be plastered everywhere during that versus some people it wouldn't be as beneficial. So that data might be skewed per se, but that's a great question. All right, Ryan, let's talk follow-up. I think follow-up is a huge piece of leads, right? What are your thoughts on timeliness, methods? Where do you stand with follow-up? What's some kind of best practices for people?
Sure. I mean, I think all of this overlaps, right? But in terms of timeliness, I think it's very important for companies to establish, again, a protocol. Hey, we're going to make sure, what we tell our team is, hey, after our trade show, if you're in sales, you need to block off the next 4 business days, right? So you're not, I get that you might need to have some critical meetings, but, block off time to make sure you can do the follow-up. We talked about booking meetings, right? On the show floor. Don't wait. A big time saver. Again, people don't realize the expense of having to chase these leads. So much cost savings with that. And I think actually this is a story about how we used to do it. Believe it or not, of course, we have amazing lead capture software, but we would come back from the show and then we would do an export from our system and it would be a spreadsheet and we're working off of a spreadsheet. And we thought to ourselves, what the hell are we doing? We're a software company. We need to be managing this in our own software. So it's kind of neat. We call it a lead analyzer. And I mentioned prioritizing things, which is really important. Don't treat all of your leads the same way, right? Make sure that you can rate them, grade them, like you said. You have some sort of system or mechanism. But we have a lead analyzer where I'm sure you've seen it. Maybe it's Trello or HubSpot where you have a visual pipeline. You can drag, one card from one row to or column to another. So we have something very similar where now our reps can look at this visual lead analyzer and they can look at the cards and they can filter, show me my urgents. And when I make my call, I drag it over and drag, and then like you said, Matt, I think focus on the really important ones where because you make the investment in your salespeople and everything else, you put it into a sequence. We talked about a Fibonacci sequence or some sort of follow-up, with
Fibonacci, yeah.
And touch points and all of that. You got to nurture those people as well.
So sooner than later, essentially, is what we're saying. In terms of follow-up, without a doubt, sooner than later, and then having the information organized, being able to get it into CRM, you need to take quick action.
100%. I mean, again, think about what we already talked about, the volume of conversations that happen. If 2 weeks pass by, it happens for me a lot. I might, speak to somebody and 2 weeks later, I get a generic email. Again, it's not personalized because you haven't collected the tidbits and the key info, that you could pass on. But the timeliness of it, at that point, I almost forgot, who I met and forgot about the conversation. So timeliness is very important. And that's why I say that quick email at a minimum, right? Get that email out with a picture of your team, because I think a lot of exhibitors don't understand that your competition is most likely on the show floor with you. And all of you are competing for the same business, right? So how are you going to differentiate yourself? How are you going to follow up quickly? How are you going to follow up in a personalized way? Those are really important. And again, booking your meetings, having the right documentation, making sure whoever that lead goes to, you capture the information on the book that you talked about, or the sports team they love, or where they came from, whatever, people do business with people they like. And if you can be likable there and be professional and follow up in a timely manner, it's going to help you convert a ton.
Do you have any advice for I find that smaller companies have an easier time following up exchanging information. When you get to some of these companies that are just large, different departments, I mean, they're just some massive companies, right?
Yeah.
And that exchange of data going into the CRM, sales teams in different regions, different managers, bosses, there's some complexities in there versus a company that exhibits that's maybe 90 people, right? And they got 7, 8 salespeople with a director of sales, and it's, essentially just becomes easier with their marketing team. Do you have any advice for larger companies that are exhibiting 20, 30 times a year? I don't know, even 8 times a year on this information and, being so spread out?
Well, I think the main thing is making sure you are efficient at collecting the information, right? We didn't talk about this, but at some events, you still have business cards. I have a stack of those business cards on my desk. Does your lead capture system allow you to very easily take a picture, rapidly scan all these business cards, get it transcribed? So to get organized, right? I think that's very key. And I would say for large organizations, those leads are probably directly going into your CRM. And I think that's really important to do. One of our clients, we asked, we're doing a pilot. They're actually the second largest company in the world based on revenue. And they're doing a pilot with us. And we asked them point blank, what does success mean to you? What would be a win? How would this universal lead capture be beneficial, right? And the simple answer for them was, if you could just send it right into my salesforce.com system, that is a big win. That is huge. So for large enterprises like the number 2 company in the world, get it in your CRM like Salesforce, and then you can have your pre-created reports and views. And as long as you've got to collect the data on the front end, right? Got to, again, be able to rate them and qualify properly. So as long as you can do that, then in Salesforce or what have you, you can set up the right view. So now you have the data going right in there, and then you have the proper view to focus your energy in the right places.
Who does that integration? I find when dealing with softwares and CRMs and things of that nature, they can do everything, but getting them to do some things is a struggle. What does that integration look like? Who does that work? Who sets that up to keep things efficient and simple?
Sure. So, most enterprises that we work with, they'll have an IT team, or they'll have a marketing automation admin or what have you. And those people typically get in there. It's a quick process, but it's pretty powerful because you can take, any field or any data point on your capture form, and you can map that to fields in your Salesforce.com system. So the data flows one-to-one. And even things like I'm talking about with the audio notes, it's such an amazing thing where that becomes now a hyperlink, and then that can flow right into a field in your Salesforce. So all I need to do when I sit down at my desk as a sales rep and I click that link is boom, I play my audio note and I'm like, oh yeah, we talked about soccer. That's right. This and that. So who does it? It's IT or CRM or marketing automation admin, and you're just mapping. That's it. You're mapping fields. Pretty basic.
All right, we're getting towards the tail end here, but I want to ask a couple good closing questions here. One I want to ask you is, if you were sitting in a room with like 20 director of events, 20 global head of events, high-level event marketers, right? What do you think that they should be discussing, or what would they be asking you, do you think?
Well, that's a 2-part question, but I would say they should be discussing, why do you attend events? It's kind of where we began, I think. And if people realize that, hey, we're there because of revenue, I find it kind of intriguing that a lot of event marketers or event coordinators, ultimately they report up to the CMO or the CEO. And what do they typically care about? Revenue. Because if we're not producing revenue, the company's not growing. So I would say, why are you there? And I feel like a lot of event marketers and coordinators, they have the process inverted, right? They typically say, I'm going to go to this show, and here's the booth I'm going to have. And then here's the team I'm going to have. And I'm going to buy electrical. I'm going to buy internet, and then, oh yeah, we need lead gen, It's the last thing that they pick. It should be flipped on its head where, again, they go, oh yeah, I know why I'm here. Revenue. Let me focus on that piece. How am I going to make sure that I maximize revenue or return on objective ROO? So that would be part one of that.
It's good stuff. What about what you think they might be asking somebody like yourself, right? Like if they just had all access, an hour to you, pick your brain, tear you down, ask you about your software, ask you about lead capture, whatever it may be, vent a little bit on their problems with lead capture and lead retrieval and anything. What do you think that conversation would look like?
Yeah, I think they would be asking, I think number one, how could I use this wherever I go?
Yeah.
And the questions would be around the process. How can we create the perfect process, and how can we take more control and ownership of this? And really that's where software adds value, is in helping companies create this repeatable process where they feel like it's their software, it's customized to them, and it's repeatable, something they can continue to use over and over so that they can prove the ROI and the ROE and ROO. You've got to have the right platform to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And to centralize all your leads and your lead capture data in one place. So they would be asking us about process and how they could implement the quintessential process.
I think you're spot on with that. And I think it's a good close here. I mean, one of the things that you've said as I've taken a bunch of notes today, one of the things that really hit me is the process, is how process driven something like this is. You have to have your own process, software, no software, show lead retrieval, whether you're using Captello's lead data capture, whoever, whatever. You need process, and you need a process to, we'll say, capture or retrieve. And then you need process in a sense to create personalization, follow up, and alignment with your team, and essentially to go gather results at these shows. So I think it's a great point that you've kind of hit home throughout today. And I appreciate you being here, man. I think you did excellent job. This was a fun show, very niche, good, specific conversation, which was really great.
Yeah. Again, thanks for having me, Matt. You can, find me on LinkedIn. I know Ish is posting some things for you and for me, but yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and our website is captello.com.
Awesome. And everybody that showed up today, thank you as always. We'll see you in 2 weeks. We appreciate your hour, appreciate your time. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for being here, man. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Keep up the good work, and thanks for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, team.
You got it. See everybody later. Thank you.